I had these experiences where it seemed like I entered into an altered state. And during those experiences, it's like the mind just slows down and then just stops. It's almost like you dissolve into something bigger than yourself.
What is consciousness? How this 20-year guy can understand consciousness?
It determines your state of mind. It determines the thoughts you think, the feelings you feel. It determines all the choices you think you have that you don't really have. It's the one thing that makes your destiny what it is and not something else.
Talking from a psychology point of view, some religions also quote this. Is it awareness?
Beyond that, it's the fundamental reality behind everything. Guruji did an experiment on a petri dish, and in the petri dish was a mixed sample of both cancer cells and non-cancerous cells. And the blessing was able to differentiate between the two. It was able to target the cancer cells and kill them off and give life and viability to the healthy cells with just one blessing. We have over 6,000 science experiments.
Are we trying to say that we are heading in a direction wherein consciousness will replace doctors?
Some of them have great experiences. They see light, they see divine, they have all these different experiences. We can't validate whether that's true or not. That's not something that science can testify to.
If God exists, then why is so much suffering in the world? Is it necessary the person has to be spiritual or religious or has certain conduct, lifestyle, nature, anything?
There are ways that you can transform your consciousness, but
what is consciousness? In a very simple language, for a layman, for a 22-year-old, Ayush sitting watching this podcast, what is consciousness? How this 20-year guy can understand consciousness?
So consciousness, from a religious perspective, the grace of God. It's God's grace in action, right? You could say it's what programs all of our lives in the same way, like you have a computer program and everything runs and operates off that program. Another great example is to look at it as, for example, our biology is right. We're running off of a program and that's called DNA. Right? So DNA tells our bodies and even our health, right? It dictates all of those things. It's very difficult to change our DNA. It's like, can you change your hair color? You can do temporary or, effects on it. You can bleach it, you can dye it, but ultimately your hair color will be brown and that's imbued in your DNA. Right? And so in the same way, you can say consciousness is the DNA of DNA.
Okay, consciousness is the DNA of DNA. Okay.
Yes. Consciousness determines your DNA. It gives the destiny to a cell and an atom. It tells a cell, like a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of your cells, like science has no idea what tells a cell what kind of organ it'll become, right? What tells it, what location in the body it's going to go to. Science has no answers for that. And they say, all cells start off the same, but there's some mechanism, there's something out there that tells a cell what it's going to grow up and evolve and become, and whether it's going to be a sick cell or a healthy cell. The body just suddenly knows what to do. In the same way, how do atoms know how to form specific materials, very specific materials? What differentiates a tree from a rock? It's like there's some intelligence behind it that tells it what to do and what to become. And all of those creations, all of those programs have a specific set of characteristics and behaviors. When we get to non-living materials, for example, there's something called physical constants, where you have like the boiling point, the melting point, the firing point, right? All those things, they don't change with a given material unless you like add in an external energy or another substance to it to have some influence over that. But the material itself, boiling water, will always boil at a certain temperature. That won't change unless you add salt to it.
Right.
But you can't change it with your intention. You can't change it by staring at it longer, right? We wish we could, but it can't be done. Science has acknowledged this. Science says it's impossible to change this. And we've been able to change it. We've changed physical constants far beyond what science says is even possible. And all of this is done by changing the programming of the atom. When you change the inherent programming of the atom, the information within the atom itself, then the characters and behaviors of the material change as a result. And when consciousness raises in intensity, when it evolves the atom, when it evolves the material, that material ends up becoming more beneficial and more useful for humanity and for other purposes. It has multifaceted purposes. So like when consciousness raises in human life, right, from lower levels of consciousness, we have a bunch of, mental health problems, emotional problems, right? Mental restlessness, ADD, ADHD. We have, confusion, depression, sadness, anxiety. Sound familiar? There's a lot of suffering. And on top of that, you can also have really bad characters, right, that are expressions of lower levels of consciousness, like, selfishness, or people who betray other people, conspirators. You have people who, are very, only focused on themselves and their own lives, or who are willing to hurt other people, damage other people, right? Those kinds of people who are ungrateful, who don't care, right? Those are the qualities of lower levels of consciousness. And when consciousness evolves in that person, the characters and behaviors of that person change as well. Suddenly they enter states of mental calmness, kind of like that state of stillness, right? You suddenly, from high levels of consciousness, you even have command over your mind, where you can stop your own thoughts. And then there's this natural state of higher, you don't have to force it. It's not behavior based. You don't try and become calm. You don't try and manage your life. It is natural and inherent to higher levels of consciousness. So this peace, this happiness, this clarity, this vision, this enthusiasm, ambition, motivation, inspiration, you start developing these characters of love and empathy, gratitude. You care for other people. You're willing to sacrifice and do more. You have a greater sense of responsibility in your impact on the world and on other people's lives. So these are inherent qualities to higher levels of consciousness. So consciousness programs everything. It determines your state of mind. It determines the thoughts you think, the feelings you feel. It determines your relationships. It determines your career, your life purpose, what you think is possible, what you don't think is possible. It determines your belief system. It determines all the choices you think you have that you don't really have. It's that one thing that sets that apart. It's the one thing that makes your destiny what it is and not something else. So that is consciousness. It's the fundamental reality behind everything.
I mean, talking from a psychology point of view, or some religions also quote this, is it awareness? Consciousness is being very aware about your thoughts, about your conduct, or it is beyond that?
Beyond that. Consciousness can make you aware, but awareness does not determine consciousness. So you have no effect over your consciousness by simply having more awareness of it, right? Because we see consciousness as coming directly from God, right? So if consciousness, right, that's how God created the universe and controls it and interacts with the world. So you could say it's a divine energy almost. It's the grace of God. So if it's coming from God, how can whatever we have within our experience of life have an effect on what God has, right? God is the creator, right? Imbues and programs our existence. That consciousness determines our awareness. Right? A lot of people like to think that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, or that if you're more aware, you can, to an extent in which if you are sincere and you're pure and innocent, you can evolve your consciousness, which can increase your awareness. But having awareness itself does not dictate having higher levels of consciousness. So things need to be altered at the level of consciousness first.
I would like to understand you as a person, right?
Okay.
How you came to this path. What's your story? How it all started?
What happened to me from a very young age, before I even had like the conscious context of religion or anything like that, like before I even had those big questions answered in my life, like what is God and all those things, I had these experiences where it seemed like I entered into an altered state. And during those experiences, it's like the mind just slows down and then just stops. It's almost like you dissolve into something bigger than yourself. And in that place of like complete stillness, it's like there's just this natural ecstatic bliss that just kind of
Mhm.
seemed to come out of nowhere.
Uh-huh.
But it just seemed to like permeate my entire being. And from that, it was like an instant knowing within me, like this
Mhm.
is God.
Okay.
And so
How
I
old were you
can't,
when you had these experiences?
it must have been like as early as maybe 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
So, and I had them periodically. It wasn't like a continuous. So
Uh-huh.
they came and went,
Mhm.
but each time they were, something of that nature.
Mhm.
And every time it's just like I don't know what told me it was God. It was just this immediate knowing this
Mhm.
is God.
Okay.
And
Uh-huh.
from that place, it's like everything that was wrong was right. All
Uh-huh.
problems, any type of, sadness or
Mhm.
anything I was going through, it's just kind of like being in the presence of that divinity
Mhm.
made all the problems in my life just go away. It
Uh-huh.
was like the thing that kind of I can't even put words to it
Uh-huh.
because when you're in that state, there are no words to
Mhm.
properly describe it. That's what I
Okay.
like to say. It's like when you have those experiences, words don't do it justice.
Mhm.
But all I can say, it was this complete stillness. I felt like I was absorbed into something outside of
Mhm.
myself.
Mhm.
It was like even, yeah, for me, it was
Uh-huh.
just God.
So these experiences used to come and go. So
Yes.
periodically,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Why do you think, I mean, these experiences happened to you? Was it like God chose, or were there any family circumstances or any such environment you were in?
No, it didn't. I mean, as most as I can say is they happened when I was in a state of calmness.
Mhm.
I was just outside sitting in nature or just sitting in my living room, but there wasn't anything that caused them to happen. I can't
Mhm.
really say that there was a way I was being or the way my family was or the environment that made it start or made it happen. It
Mhm.
just kind of felt like it came to me out of nowhere.
Uh-huh.
That's as best as I can describe it. I
Uh-huh.
never knew when it was coming. I could kind of feel the lead up to it, but I
Uh-huh.
never knew what could cause it to happen. And that was my struggle my whole life is like, how can I make this happen again?
Uh-huh.
Because when you have that experience and then after a while it fades, the longing comes out, that
Mhm.
longing to have that experience
Mhm.
because it's so complete. It's
Mhm.
so perfect in so many ways that you life by comparison is so imperfect and
Uh-huh.
incomplete
Right.
that you want nothing more than to return to that perfection.
Mhm.
So like my whole life was just waiting for the next experience and
Mhm.
nothing I could do would make it happen. And I had
Mhm.
experience with a lot of things like yoga and meditation and all those
Mhm.
things. And nothing gave me that experience except maybe it was destiny. I can't
Mhm.
possibly say what it was, but
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Right. So, whenever any such experience happened, what kind of change you experienced? Was there any change every time this experience came to you, or you used to return back to the normal state?
No, I would say that my ability to perceive and understand life was a
Mhm.
little altered every time.
Mhm.
I felt like, uh, I don't know, it gave me more depth,
Mhm.
more clarity and understanding. And I felt like every time I went into that experience, like obviously there was this part of yourself that's always connected to it. I feel even though the
Mhm.
experience is gone, I feel like there's always a part of you that has changed
Uh-huh.
permanently from it.
Uh-huh.
And so those changes over time, it kind of directed the course of my life,
Mhm.
which led me to, wanting to sustain that state permanently.
Mhm.
And so I had no other understanding of how that could be done because religion didn't really talk about it in the way that
Mhm.
I would understand it as the
Mhm.
same.
Yeah.
And so for me, I had some experience with the gurus and everything. And
Uh-huh.
so I had this idea from a young age that,
Mhm.
okay, maybe there's a guru or somebody who lives in that state all the time,
Mhm.
who through that connection can help establish you in that state as
Mhm.
like a conduit or like a
Uh-huh.
jumper cable.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so I had that understanding that, they were like an extension of divine. And so you
Mhm.
could reach divine through them. They could
Uh-huh.
help you until eventually you had your own connection.
Uh-huh.
And so eventually, I think I was around maybe 8 years of age where I had another one of those experiences. And again, I was at recess, so I wasn't even calm. I was running around playing with
Okay.
other kids. I
Uh-huh.
remember I just ran somewhere and stood there for a moment. And then that experience, right, that feeling came over me again.
Uh-huh.
And then I felt, myself dissolving into that light. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I just had this deep knowing, this immediate knowing,
Mhm.
right, that there was a man out there that I was
Mhm.
going to marry who would be this miraculous enlightened being on this planet who
Mhm.
would lead to my own enlightenment and my own awakening.
Mhm.
And that happened from the age of 8 before I even had a crush on boys or anything like that, right? This
Uh-huh.
knowing that I had a husband out there who divine picked out for me, right? That I was
Uh-huh.
destined to marry.
And
And
you were
so
8 years old
I
at
was
that
only
time.
8 years of age
Uh-huh.
when that happened. And
Uh-huh.
so I was the only thing that divine left out was like when. So I had this whole uncertainty my whole life. I knew that this man was there. I knew that this man was going to come into my life. I didn't know when, because
Mhm.
this could have happened anytime. Maybe I would be dying and this man would come in like the last 5 minutes
Mhm.
of my life. And then I'd be like, finally, but I didn't want to wait that long. I'm like, I want to meet him now. And so this type of uncertainty, obviously, when you live with uncertainty, you
Mhm.
live with a lot of mental health problems
Right.
because
Uh-huh.
uncertainty it causes stress within your being.
Mhm.
It causes mental restlessness, ADD,
Mhm.
ADHD, anxiety. I had this deep loneliness and this longing
Mhm.
and this inability to really connect with my peers and other people my age. I didn't have a lot
Mhm.
of friends. And so, it kind of led to a lot of other problems,
Mhm.
mental health and emotional problems,
Uh-huh.
huge depression and sadness.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and then there was this sense that I needed to live my life in accordance with,
Mhm.
meeting this person.
Right.
I wanted God. I wanted enlightenment, even before I
Mhm.
knew what enlightenment was. For me, it was
Right.
just, I want God.
Right.
And so I led my life, trying to be perfect for God.
Like how? I mean.
How is like, I didn't know what to do. So based upon what religion and everything told me, it
Mhm.
was like, don't do drugs, like don't smoke, don't drink. I tailored my whole life in a way that
Mhm.
I felt would make me deserving or worthy.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so I didn't even have sex. I didn't
Uh-huh.
party or anything like that, right? I
Mhm.
didn't do anything that all the other kids and teenagers my age were
Mhm.
doing.
Right.
So I lived my life with God as my priority and I focused and I tried to keep even my mind, my thoughts, my heart, everything pure.
Mhm.
I tried to live according to these divine principles, which is,
Mhm.
to be loving, empathetic,
Mhm.
caring, sacrificing. So I tried to do all of that, emulate that kind of character and behavior in my
Mhm.
life in order to, basically reach a point where divine was like, okay, you're ready.
Uh,
You're ready now.
right.
So, and eventually, I guess I was ready.
So what I can understand is at a very young age, even when you were 8 years old, you had an idea, you had this thought very clear in yourself that
Yes.
there is going to be a person
Yes.
whom you will marry, right? And to be deserving, you conditioned your entire life accordingly,
Right.
right? When you were having such thoughts or experiences, did you share it with your family, your friends, and what were their reactions when you told this to them?
So I didn't really share it because for me, a majority of my life, I thought they were normal experiences that
Mhm.
everybody had.
Oh.
And for me, also, I learned from a very young age not to
Mhm.
talk about God with a lot of people. So I realized very early on that, especially my peers, a lot of them didn't believe in God. And a
Mhm.
lot of them didn't have the same kind of experiences and upbringing I did.
Mhm.
And so for me, I didn't feel, and I didn't have a lot of people around me that I could talk to about
Mhm.
it. And even my mother,
Mhm.
nurtured me from an early age. She was like, be careful who you talk to
Uh-huh.
and be careful because a lot of people might not understand,
Uh-huh.
we're a lot more spiritually open as a
Uh-huh.
family and a lot of people have very, specific blinders or beliefs
Mhm.
and they can
Right.
flip at any time. So I didn't share it with a lot of people. I think my mother knew to a certain extent,
Uh-huh.
but at the same time, when you have these experiences that, like I said, there aren't really words to talk about them. It's
Mhm.
not really possible. So I didn't know how to even begin describing them. And a lot of them, like until I started going through those experiences after meeting my husband, who's my guru, right? Until I had those experiences come back to me frequently, until I became enlightened myself, like I didn't understand how extraordinary they were until they started happening again. And I was like, oh, this is what that was.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So
It's kind of
how
like
did
that.
this happen? I mean, there was a huge uncertainty. Would it
Yeah.
be at the age of 90 or at the age of 19? You had no idea when you will meet
Yeah.
the person. So how that uncertainty turned into, say, certainty, or how you met your guru? Uh, how exactly? I mean, from that that mental state when you are stressed or you don't know,
Right.
you're living in that condition of uncertainty. How it unfolded?
Right. So my mother, like I said, opened very spiritually. So
Uh-huh.
we dabbled in everything.
Uh-huh.
So I joke that she's a hippie without the drugs. So she was open to all kinds of, different modalities, healing. We went to many different gurus. We went to many different healers, clairvoyants, psychics, like you name it, we probably tried it. And she was seeing this kind of growing loneliness and sadness and this inability to connect, right? She was very aware of that. And so I think a lot of the reason why she took me to meet all these people was to help me resolve whatever was going on within me, because she didn't know.
Sorry, what was her reason for exploring so much in terms of spirituality or gurus?
Well, she was brought up Christian, but she had a spiritual experience almost like what I had. A little different though, where she experienced the miraculous healing. And so because of that, and she knew it was God, and it was outside of the context of Christianity, but it didn't conflict it at the same time. So she started, looking for answers and I guess trying different things out. And so that's what led her to being so open. So she just understood that all of them touch upon the same truth. So she took me everywhere. And what happened is that I had like maybe short periods of reprieve at best. So just like maybe a few days where I could maybe say it was psychological or placebo or whatnot, but I felt good for a few days. Maybe, I felt a little calmer or more peace, or like, okay, maybe these things are good now.
Right.
And then it would always come back, though. I'd come back to that baseline of sadness and loneliness and anxiety again. It would always come back, that nothing got rid of it entirely. And in other scenarios, I felt nothing at all. I was just like, I don't know what happened. I trust that something happened, right? Because that's what a lot of spiritual people feel, is that I trust something happened, even though they feel no outcome. So it's an unfortunate side of spirituality. The spirituality is like, wait till your death, then you get the benefit. So it's kind of like, if I wait, it'll manifest somehow in my life. But nothing really happened. And so because of this openness, right, and she had other experiences with other gurus, she had also like a friend circle, who were into similar things that she was into. And she went to an event, and at that event, they were talking about this man named Guruji, Guruji Mahendra Trivedi. And they were talking about, his incredible scientific research that he was conducting to prove the efficacy, the power of his blessings, and as well as validate the existence of God and consciousness as a scientific reality. And so, she was amazed. She had never heard of somebody doing this before. And she had heard so many, because at that time, and to this day, it's only grown, so many incredible testimonials. I mean, that alone was persuasive enough, the kind of miracles people were reporting that they had. So she was like, okay, I'll go meet this guru and I'll get a blessing myself. And she was going through her own problems with relationships with, the family and everything, and nothing solved it. Right? She tried everything. Like I said, nothing fixed it. So she got a blessing, and literally within 24 hours, those relationships that she prayed for to improve completely changed overnight. And she had a bunch of health problems that she was suffering with just completely resolve. And so she's like, she never experienced that with anything. Nothing was able to fix those problems, especially to that complete resolution. And so she's like, okay, this is real. Whatever's happening, he's the real McCoy, the real deal. So let me take my daughter to meet him.
Uh,
And she offered it as a gift for my birthday. She was like,
uh-huh.
we can, get a cake or a present or a birthday party, or you want a blessing from
Right.
a guru.
Uh,
And I immediately said yes, like, forget the cake and everything. Just give me the blessing. I'm ready for it. I
right.
just knew immediately I wanted it. I was so amazed with her experience that I wanted to try it myself.
And how old were you at this time?
20.
20.
This is
Okay.
in January 2011.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And my birthday was January 30th, 2011. So
Uh-huh.
on the way to meeting him, right, she was describing him, kind of preparing me to meet him. Because my experience with the gurus is like the aesthetics who are like monks who wear
Yeah.
the saffron robes
Right.
and all those things. And she's like, he's very different from that. So just, I'm preparing you. He's, he cut off all his hair. He wears a suit and tie. He's all about science and practical thinking and outcome. So he's not going to talk about all that spiritual language that you're used to hearing. And then on top of that, she was just going into all of the science. And I remember when she went into detail about it and I was hearing it for the first time, I was amazed and touched and a little bit shocked as well, because there's something really exotic about an Indian guru from the East coming to America, where they can easily get a massive audience of followers, just like that. They just wear the right outfit and speak the right language and know any little bit of information. They're a good orator and they'd have a mass following. And there are many examples to prove that. So he could have easily been successful there. And at the same time, as I learned later, he already had an established follower base in India. He had a huge number of people who already revered him. He had wealth. He had status. He had senators, politicians, like businessmen, entrepreneurs. He had actresses and actors from Bollywood, distributors, producers, high-level people that already revered him and saw him as their guru, who gave him everything. And he left that. He literally left that lifestyle, left those people, came to America, chopped off all his hair, put on the suit and tie, and you have no idea how difficult it is to be taken as a guru. But the moment you cut off your hair and wear a suit, it's kind of insane how many people don't see you as a guru anymore the moment you do that. It's like just a change in outfit and you're not a guru anymore. And on top of that, the kind of skeptics scientifically that I knew he would face with the masses, the people, if he's doing things that are completely unconventional and against what we see as science today, he's doing things that are considered impossible and proving things that shouldn't be possible through a divine blessing. Right. So to be taken seriously, for scientists to want to work with him, for science to accept what they're seeing as true and fact, instead of, saying, I can't accept it. I can't deny the data, but I can't accept it either. Right. That's a hard path. He's going against norms and establishments that have been there for decades. He's fighting an uphill battle constantly. So for me, that spoke greatly of his integrity and who he is as a human being. So I was... And I was amazed because I had never heard of someone proving that kind of reality, that God existed scientifically. Because I knew God existed, but like my own experience, I was never taken seriously about it. I couldn't talk to anybody about it. And he was here saying this is real. So for me, I was just like, finally. So in that car ride, as she was describing more and more about him, I was just like so deeply touched. And at the same time, I always get emotional talking about his journey and my journey meeting him. But what ended up happening is she was describing him to me and, his appearance and all that. And I was just kind of, joking to myself. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I was going to meet this person and I want his blessing to bring that person into my life that I had from a vision of 8 years of age, right? And it turned out he was that same person. But I was going to him for a blessing to bring that person into my life. So I was thinking, wouldn't that be funny if that was actually him? But it was like, sometimes you have thoughts and you think they're fantasy and they turn out to be real. It was like one of those moments where I thought it was fantasy. It was just, a delusion. And then I went to him, I got my blessing, and I very quickly knew that he was that man. I knew it almost immediately.
Weren't you curious? So, like, how is this working? I took a blessing, and next day everything has changed. I mean, what kind of curiosity, questions, or doubts, or what was going in your mind when you were experiencing sudden paradigm shift in your life?
I mean, I led my whole life like meeting these kind of people and doing these kinds of things and having
Mhm.
these healings and getting, very minimal tangible benefits.
Mhm.
So to have that happen so dramatically, it was like it's about time. That's kind of what
Mhm.
it felt like more than anything. It was
Uh,
a little shock and awe, but more than anything, because I 100% believed it was real, because my
mhm.
faith was strong, my
Mhm.
intuition was strong. I knew God was real. I knew God was capable of these things.
Right.
So it was a mixture of relief and a sense of finally and awe that this
Uh-huh.
happened like out
Uh,
of nowhere, that
right.
nothing like kind of led up to it. There's no preparation for it. It
Mhm.
was just kind of like suddenly there's this guru and
Right.
he blessed me and I transformed my whole life.
Mhm.
So maybe his
Right.
blessing led me to
Yes.
marrying him. Who knows?
Mm. Because you asked for that blessing, right? You
Yeah,
bless me
maybe
so that I
that's
get
what
that man.
made it. I asked for that, and then he was like, "Oh, I changed my destiny too. Now I'm stuck with you." No.
You also mentioned about his uphill battle, that instead of, in India, he had that following, he had wealth, status, everything. And
Yeah.
he decided to go to States, cut his hair, wear a
Yes.
suit. What was his reason behind doing this? What was his trigger, or what was his reason of bringing this shift in his life?
Right. So a lot of what happened with him is he witnessed a lot of people who would go to these types of spiritual leaders
Mhm.
or transformational leaders or whoever it may be,
Mhm.
and they'd give their lives over to these people,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of them were not real teachers, false teachers, or
Mhm.
teachers who abuse or manipulate or take your money and don't do
Mhm.
anything for you, just kind of create this status and this psychological belief.
Mhm.
And he said that from a very young age, right? He heard this story about Krishna where it's essentially like, the worst thing that you can do, that, he's Krishna was talking to somebody who was asking, what can you forgive? And he gave a list of all the things he can forgive. But he said, the one thing that I can't forgive is if you give someone like a sincere seeker false hope.
Mhm.
He says, that's the
Mhm.
one thing I can never forgive.
Mhm.
And so that was something that was just inherent to him. He was like, am I giving them false hope? Am I one of these teachers? He's like, they're getting benefits and I see the outcome,
Mhm.
right? They're reporting to me huge benefits, but I
Mhm.
just need to know, what are the limits? What are the capabilities of this blessing? Why
Mhm.
is it limited to only people? Right? Why
Mhm.
have all these people who are doing these blessings or teaching these rituals and dogmas or whatever it may be, why have they not tried to establish this scientifically? And why have they not tried to extend it to things beyond those with psychological influence, like
Mhm.
beyond people? Why
Right.
have they not tried? I mean, if it's God doing the miracle, then why is God only capable of transforming humans? God
Mhm.
can surely do more than that. God
Mhm.
is the creator. God created everything. God can change everything.
Mhm.
So God can change non-living materials. God can change bacteria and viruses. God can change all of that. So I think part of it was he says he's actually one of the greatest skeptics there is, which is
Mhm.
ironic. You probably don't expect someone who's enlightened to say that, but I think it's more of a testament to his ethics, his morality, and his integrity than it is
Mhm.
skepticism about the nature of God. It was more like he wanted to be a leader with integrity. And he also understood the importance and significance of
Mhm.
establishing this scientifically. He knew that this is something that is the only thing that can
Mhm.
solve all of the most prevalent problems we see today,
Mhm.
where science, technology, and modern medicine have reached their limits in being able to address.
Mhm.
And the only way, right, we see a lot of people running away and falling away from religion
Mhm.
and spirituality, even if they haven't really given up on God yet,
Mhm.
right? They're showing signs where they're giving up on a lot of those avenues, those
Mhm.
pathways to God. And so he says the only way that religion and spirituality will prove useful again to humanity, where humanity will depend on it in the same way they depend on science and technology,
Mhm.
is when spirituality and religion can offer more than what science can deliver.
Mhm.
And so he saw the outcome of the blessings, and he thought this needs to be an objective, empirical, scientific reality for all those reasons. For the integrity of religion and spirituality, to restore people's faith in God, to establish a fact-based God, not a faith-based God. Because God, if God's real, God is fact-based. God can be demonstrated in a lab using all the scientific protocols that we use for all natural phenomena. And so, that was his whole journey leading up to it. So for me, it's an indication of a man full of honesty, authenticity, and integrity. That's what I see. That was his pull and his motivation. He wasn't interested in the facade of the guru. He was interested in the real thing.
Talk about this subject, God. I mean, series of questions comes in everyone's mind, right? But you mentioned that can be proved in laboratory with facts.
Yes.
Right? How?
So when we get into establishing God, so we have to see how are we going to measure God. What religion is missing about the nature of God, because religion believes God exists, right? And the origin of the universe, if we're saying there is a creator and we're reading all these religious texts and knowing that, okay, all of them point to that nothing existed before and then suddenly everything existed, right? There were no prior materials, energy, matter, all these things. There are different scientific theories about that, but the religious theories are that God created those things. God created these materials. And then you have some parts of science that accept that maybe consciousness is fundamental, right? Max Planck, quantum physicist, he spent decades of his life, researching quantum physics, and he came to the conclusion himself, though he was not able to properly validate it in his lifetime, he came to the conclusion himself that consciousness is fundamental and matter is derivative of consciousness. So consciousness came first. And everything else in all these different variations and forms are simply expressions of that consciousness. So what is missing in religion is how God interacts with the world. God interacts with the world through consciousness. So that's what's missing in religion. God is established in religion, but not how God works, right? Not how we connect with God. That kind of interaction is a little ambiguous. And then when we get into science, science is establishing consciousness as a byproduct of the brain, sometimes as, before the brain, but it has not established its relationship to God yet. And so that's what we've done scientifically is we've been able to establish the relationship between all three, between God, consciousness, and matter, and how they all work together, how they all integrate and work as one system.
God, consciousness, and matter.
Yeah, the link, that's the missing link. Right, between God and matter is consciousness. And so to establish the existence of God, what we're doing is we are evolving things at the level of consciousness through divine blessings. And so these divine blessings, they raise consciousness or increase the intensity. You can use other words synonymously with consciousness, like the grace of God, the soul, the spirit, all of those things, like empowering the soul or more of the grace of God in your life. For me, they're all the same thing. We reference them the same. But we can say more consciousness. And so when there's no scientific tool that can measure consciousness directly. But when you raise and evolve consciousness, you can measure its effects. You can measure the impact of that. There are certain things consciousness should be able to do if it's fundamental, right? Certain things that it can change on like a programming level. If consciousness programs reality and gives everything its structure, its form, its characters and behaviors, then changing consciousness should change all of those things, right? We're doing it the other way around. Science has it wrong. Science is trying to change structures and trying to deal with things chemically and materially in order to have an influence over the real program or consciousness. So they're just missing that piece of vital information, which is why we have all of these problems, because all of these problems persist and are created from lower levels of consciousness. You raise the consciousness, these problems that we all see today, problems with our agriculture, our mental health, our technology, our science, our medicine, all of these things are worldwide pandemic level crises that science has been able to improperly address are all solved by simply doing one thing, and that is raising the consciousness involved.
And if someone wants to move towards higher level of consciousness, is it something that can be generated, or is it something which is harnessed, or it's like downloaded? How does it work?
So, I mean, the fastest and quickest way from even my own experience, but also what our scientific studies say, right? We have over 6,000 science experiments, over 670 peer-reviewed
6,000
publications.
science experiments.
6,000 science experiments. And it's not just one of them had a good result, or maybe 10 of them, and we're only talking about those 10. I'm saying every single one of them, not a single experiment has failed or proven less than unprecedented outcomes. I'm saying every single one of the 6,000 experiments has shown something miraculous that consciousness is capable of through these divine blessings. That's how we raise consciousness, is by the application of divine blessings. And so you could say that is probably the fastest, most effective way of increasing consciousness very quickly. That's what we found to be very effective. And I found even from my own experience and the testimonials of over, we've actually blessed over 300,000 people, but we have a huge reservoir of testimonials from our website as well. But there are ways that you can transform your consciousness without the help of the divine blessings, but it's a lot slower, it's a lot more tedious, and also given this day and age and the world we live in, it's a lot more confusing.
Like what kind of ways, which are slower ways?
So there's only really one way that you can do it. And that is by having innocence and purity.
By having?
Innocence and purity, by becoming innocent and pure.
Okay.
If you can somehow restore your innocence and purity as a human being, your purity, your pure understanding of life, like that experience or that state of mind you have when you're a child, everything's new and fresh and everything's, full of wonder and awe. And it's like there's a level of trust in life and trust in your parents in the same way you have that trust in the divine. Your parents are divine when you were a child because you have that kind of faith and trust in their presence in your lives. In the same way, we must establish that level of purity, that level of trust and faith in the divine. And so that is a faster way, right, to evolve your consciousness. But at the same time, it's difficult for many people to restore that natural blueprint that we all have. And at the same time, it's a lot more difficult and slower by comparison to when you have these blessings, as well as following that path. The blessings do something that almost expedite, or they speed up your evolution. And you actually, there are a lot of gurus and spiritual leaders who have talked about how the guru can help speed up your evolution, your progression towards enlightenment. There are a lot of theories about that, and we've been able to see this scientifically and empirically, that yes, the guru, because they are connected to God, there's something about that connection and being, within that presence or being connected to them somehow, even just energetically, where they can help speed up your own evolution as well. And so it's a very effective way for you to even restore your purity and innocence. But that's the best way. And then following the divine principles and fundamentals. So whether you believe in them or not, right? That there is something called, the Dharma, right? The absolute, where there are certain set of divine principles and fundamentals that you must conduct yourself and express. You must have an expression of these characters, or you must fulfill your responsibilities and adopt this kind of nature within your life, and that helps speed up your evolution and growth. Well, we like to call it following the divine principles and fundamentals, meaning God, in the same way where I conducted my life, in a way that I wanted to feel worthy enough to meet this man, to become enlightened. I led my life in a very specific way. I felt I needed to stay with the best morality, the best ethics. I knew I needed to think less selfishly. And I felt in my life, everybody, I'm sure at one point in time feels like I'm very selfish. So I'm like, I know I have these characters, from a young age where it's like, I need to start thinking of other people. I need to develop these characters. They're not inherent yet, but I need to develop them. So sometimes just following and disciplining your life with those divine principles and fundamentals, right? You curate those characters because God blesses you in a way by
Mhm.
following those divine principles and
Mhm.
helps evolve your consciousness so that you actually embody them, you
Uh,
express them naturally.
mhm.
And so, but it's faster with a guru, with a
Right.
blessing. That's for sure from
Uh-huh.
my own experience.
Right. You mentioned about the scientific study 6,000, right? So
Yes.
any top scientific study which is like, I mean, maybe I can say your favorite or one which made you feel, wow, this is something exceptional.
So many.
Maybe share a few. Yeah.
uh, I'll go through a few different types of science
Sure.
and go over maybe just the
Mhm.
general, but there are several that have been just completely awe-inspiring. One of them is the moment that it was discovered that this blessing can change the atom.
Mhm.
Because the atom, that's the smallest particle in
Right.
existence. It's the basic building block of all of life. If you can
Uh,
change the atom, you can change everything,
uh,
right? That composes everything visible and invisible, right? So that was a very effective way of saying consciousness is really fundamental. And
mhm.
we're able to measure those changes. We're able to see that we can make the atom bigger, we can make it smaller
What kind of experiment was this?
with our material science.
Okay.
So we've measured a bunch of different metals, ceramics, polymers, and chemicals,
Mhm.
but we take that from these third-party institutions, very high profile from all over the
Mhm.
world, right? We've worked with renowned scientists. We've worked
Mhm.
with, Dr. Garrett Young and Dr. Rustum Roy,
Mhm.
and, a lot of scientists. We've conducted studies. Dr. Garrett Yunt, that's another incredible experiment that was
Mhm.
conducted by the
Uh,
California Pacific Medical Research Institute.
mhm.
And we basically, Guruji did an experiment on a petri dish. And in the
Mhm.
petri dish was a mixed sample of both cancer cells and non-cancerous cells.
Mhm.
And the blessing was able to differentiate between the two. It was able to target the cancer cells and kill them
Mhm.
off and
Uh-huh.
give life and viability to the healthy cells with just one blessing.
Mhm.
So that itself shows that there is something intelligent
Mhm.
in this
Right.
blessing, that there's something intelligent in the nature of consciousness
Uh-huh.
that is able to determine the needs, figure
Mhm.
out what needs to be done, and treat each thing distinctly and differently.
Mhm.
And Dr. Garrett Yunt, in his report, said that this is the holy grail,
Mhm.
right, for
Mhm.
cancer treatment. He said there is no cancer treatment that's able to determine with such efficacy and treat those two different types of cells differently.
Mhm.
He says that's an impossibility. We have not been able to reach that level of technology or medicine. And this consciousness, right, this
Mhm.
blessing is able to do just that. He said this is the holy grail for cancer scientists.
Mhm.
And so that's another incredible experiment. We have
Yeah.
so many. We've been able to change and transform cancer cells into non-cancerous cells. So not just
Mhm.
kill them off, but transform them back into healthy
Uh,
cells. With agriculture, so we've conducted a lot of experiments in agriculture as well,
mhm.
where science in its current day and age is completely dependent upon toxic chemicals.
Mhm.
When we're talking about pesticide, weedicide, chemical fertilizers, right? Or fumigating
Oh.
crops and soil and destroying our soil quality, creating toxicity in our food and our
Mhm.
environment. Because ultimately, whatever chemicals you put on the food, the plant absorbs it and processes
Right.
it. So it will be infused in the food we eat. It'll be in
Mhm.
our soil. It will be in our groundwater. It'll be in
Mhm.
our air. So that's a source of a lot of the health problems we see today as well, is
Right.
our quality, our environment, the toxicity of the food we
Mhm.
eat. And so, but science is dependent upon it. It's not that science is intentionally
Mhm.
trying,
Right.
right, to damage
Right.
people. The agriculture industry is just trying to produce enough food to feed everybody and
Mhm.
to make a profit,
Right.
right? Without the use of this, it can't produce this amount of food. To get
Mhm.
that good production, it needs, it's dependent upon this.
Mhm.
And we've seen over the decades that the agricultural industry is growing more and more dependent upon these chemicals.
Mhm.
It's
True.
no longer reached a point where it can taper off or try alternative methods. It's getting
Mhm.
harder and harder to produce the same crops using the same methods. We're
Mhm.
increasing the amount of chemicals we're using. We're increasing the amount of times we fumigate. All because if you don't, the bacteria and viruses will completely destroy the crops. Pest
Mhm.
attack, fungi, it's impossible.
Right.
It,
Mhm.
it's in such a bad shape.
Mhm.
And with our experiments, and we've done experiments on plants and trees, many different types of crops, seeds,
Mhm.
nuts, fruits, basically anything you could probably name. We've probably
Mhm.
conducted an experiment on it. And we found that we're able to increase the yield by as much as 600%, right? Without any use of toxic chemicals, without any chemical fertilizer, any fungicide, any weedicide, nothing whatsoever, not even organic chemicals. And we're able to produce greater yield than all the conventional methods that are used to produce the greatest amount of crops that we see today. We're exceeding conventional methods. And on top of that, it's not just quantity, it's quality. We're seeing shelf life double, meaning the crop itself, the deterioration is less. It's able to sustain itself longer. It has greater immunity, right? We've seen these crops have much greater chlorophyll levels. And some chlorophyll levels you can't possibly alter. It's not possible to alter them scientifically. And we've seen alterations even in that type of chlorophyll. We've seen changes in nutritional content. We've seen increase in, vitamins and minerals in the crops themselves. So there is no method, no technology or treatment that science has been able to use to improve the quality of produce.
Right.
It's been able to increase the quantity and prevent pest attack, but it can't improve the nutritional value of our food. And in fact, a lot of times our nutritional value of our food is decreasing. And we've seen this consciousness restores the nutritional value. The plant is able to uptake more nutrition from the soil. It has greater immunity. It's able to process toxicity better. Because of its greater immunity, it doesn't get attacked by bacteria, viruses, and pests. It has a natural inherent protection to it. So consciousness is something that has this intelligence and knows how to arrange your environment and your circumstances in such a way that everything works together harmoniously for your greatest growth and for your greatest benefit. And we've seen that in crops and plants as well. Right? We've seen evolution of bacteria from one form to another. It's something that takes like decades to be able to do.
Right.
We've been able to do it in, maybe a couple months. Or a very significantly short period of time. We've made drug-resistant bacteria respond to drugs, right? Superbugs that we're not able to treat anymore with the antibiotics we have, or we're, creating more generations of antibiotics to target bugs that were easier to, treat decades ago because of the overuse of antibiotics. And now we're seeing that these superbugs are responding to lower generations of antibiotics, lower doses. Things that, the superbugs never responded to. And we're able to see outcomes in terms of viral load. We're able to see outcomes in terms of genetics, altering DNA. We've seen changes, like I said, with non-living materials, where we're able to change the structure of the atom, the isotopic abundance, the distance between atoms, energy within the atom. We're able to change its weight, right? Isotopic abundance, I think I said that. Everything. With non-living materials, and we're able to measure the effects. But most recently, and this is what we've been leading up to for all these years, because all of this is good, but the moment you deal with human health and wellness, you really need some clinical trials under your belt. So all of this time, we've been waiting to establish and create enough of a scientific, level of credibility so that we can finally talk about this and share this with the world. That's why a lot of people haven't heard about the research we've done yet, because we've been waiting for these clinical trials. But if I were to pick anything out of all the experiments that we've conducted that have, proven any kind of wow factor, for me personally, it's been these clinical trials. Because this is human life we're dealing with. This is something that has been able to completely alter and change people's lives, their destiny, their health, well-being, completely eradicate their mental and emotional health problems, and just completely transform their lives. And we've seen this reflected in all of our testimonials, but it is so impactful to finally see it in the form of these clinical trials.
So what you were always hearing from people in form of testimonials, now you've done clinical trials,
Yes.
and now you have results based on those trials.
Yes.
Right? So what kind of results you have seen in those clinical trials?
So these are gold standard clinical trials. It's what, clinicians used to make sure that there's absolutely no risk of bias or psychological influence or placebo effect. And we're using the gold standard of clinical trials, which is randomized control trials, RCTs. Right. That's what, we consider to be the gold standard of determining the outcome of a specific drug or therapy. And on top of that, some of them have even been double blinded.
Uh-huh.
So even the researcher, is unaware of what group is receiving the blessing. Even
Uh-huh.
we don't know who we're blessing.
Okay.
Everybody's given a random number. So it eliminates the bias,
Right.
that the researchers might have. Maybe they'll cherry pick data or ask questions differently according to what group, right?
Mhm.
So we've eliminated, absolutely all that psychological influence that might manipulate or alter the study. And on top of that, all of these clinical trials have a control group.
Mhm.
So the group that never receives the blessing.
Okay.
And then we have a placebo group so that we can directly measure the treated group with any psychological influence, because you can't deny that there is psychological impact to a certain extent.
Mhm.
But what we've seen in the treated group far exceeds the outcome that we've witnessed in the placebo groups.
Mhm.
And it's all been measured and empirically tested scientifically.
What kind of outcomes you were able to witness?
So on 3 of our clinical trials, we've conducted psychological assessments. So we have a third party, a psychological clinician
Mhm.
who's licensed to, conduct these clinical trials.
Mhm.
And so we've seen that all of the people who are part of these clinical trials suffer from very severe mental and emotional health problems.
Mhm.
That's the kind of volunteers that we wanted.
Okay.
And we wanted people who had like anything from, severe depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, mental restlessness, ADD, ADHD, fatigue, exhaustion, even poor finances, things that are also affected by psychology, but, maybe other circumstances, but we're measuring those things as well, their finances. We're measuring people's relationships to other people.
Okay.
We're measuring things like women, for example, their mental and emotional health, and also their menstrual health,
Mhm.
right? Their periods and their cramping and, all of the problems that are associated with menstruation. So we're not just measuring like, do you feel better? We're also measuring things that are very hard to influence psychologically. And on top of that, we're also validating how the world and the environment feels about these people as well. So what their immediate family, what society, how they respond to them, the changes they see in them differently as well. We've organized a psychological assessment to take into those factors as well, because sometimes your own perception can be delusion.
Right.
So how do people see you? That's a huge indicator of the study as well. And then on top of that, there is something that is notoriously very difficult to influence psychologically. And it's designed specifically for that reason, to rule out any subjective or psychological data, to keep it as objective as possible. And it is the gold standard that has been used in clinical trials since 2012. And it is called the NIH Toolbox.
NIH Toolbox.
NIH Toolbox. So it's developed by the National Institutes of Health for these clinical trials.
Okay.
And it's determined the ones we used was the ones for cognition and motor function. And most of the time, this NIH Toolbox is used to determine if a particular drug or therapy or treatment has any adverse effects on cognition and motor function. Because it's very rare, or perhaps even impossible in many cases, for them to see any positive effects in cognition and motor function. So it's usually used to just determine if there's any toxicity or any, damage or repercussions or risk factors in a treatment or drug.
Right.
And our clinical trials are the first to show nearly 100% improvement in every single tested parameter from the NIH Toolbox for cognition and motor function. Right. And so we're talking everything from working memory, executive thinking. We're talking vocabulary, language skills, and we're dealing with, for motor function, endurance, dexterity, grip strength, locomotion, standing balance, right? Things that are not really easy to influence psychologically. And on top of that, the researchers obviously don't know what group is what. And also, even the test itself is randomized. So you have no idea what question's going to come up. It changes all the time. For each person, it's different. It's constantly changing. And the moment you input the data, it's locked in the server located in the United States, and you have no ability to alter it after the fact. So if you make a mistake, it's secure. And so this has completely eliminated any effects of psychological impact and shows how significant and unprecedented this data is. And on top of that, the improvements in cognition and motor function is an indication of greater health and well-being. It's an indication that your mind is functioning better. Your mind is what tells your body, what to do and how to work efficiently and productively. When you see improvements in cognition and you see it reflected in your motor function, it's an indicative factor of good health, higher levels of well-being, much greater than before. And we see this reflected in all of the psychological data, which they have found in every one of the clinical trials on hundreds of volunteers. They found that every single one of them had all of their mental and emotional health problems completely resolved by the end of the clinical trial.
Amazing.
So
Great. I mean, both the things which you mentioned first, when we were talking about agriculture, the plants, no fertilizers, no chemicals, no toxic things being used, that is again a global problem, right?
Yes.
And similarly, the mental health challenges or cognitive problems, they're also globally a big problem.
Right.
So can they be solved at a scale?
Yeah.
The agricultural problems or the mental health problems can
I truly believe they can be at scale, and we've shown this at scale. We've not just done it on like one crop in your backyard, for example. These experiments, they're conducted on acreage, like 106 acres of crop, right? We've treated 9,000 cashew saplings. Like this is large scale production and large scale experiments, and these things, like we've treated over not treated, but we could say blessed over 300,000 people, right? When we do these blessings, we do them on Zoom calls with sometimes up to 1,000 people at a time. So these are large scale operations, and it's only done with one blessing. So you can imagine that if we have the capability to apply this to multiple different industries, even we can alter new materials. If we alter new materials, what can we do? We can make materials that can advance our current technology, because there are certain limitations that technology has because of the materials available to it. Right? Certain things, right? Microchips, for example, or silicone chips, there's issues with its conductivity and its, heat distribution. There are certain issues that we have that we can't move outside of that. So it limits the computing capabilities that we have. And with the rise of AI and technology, you understand that we're going to need to catch up with, the advancements in technology and meet it with new materials on this planet. We're needed to develop new ways of processing information better and at scale and more efficiently in ways that are more sustainable for our environment. And we've shown that these divine blessings, they can change those physical constants. They can change the atom. They can change all of those things that can have a direct effect on the way the material processes energy, the functionality of it, everything, to make it more beneficial and more useful to evolve our current technology. So this can happen at mass scale across multiple different industries, and it can do more than just solve our problems. It can evolve humanity. It can progress us. It can do things that we don't even conceive of possible now because of the limitations of what we think are possible. And so this is going beyond that.
I mean, what I'm finding very interesting is generally people who are into spirituality or in this field, they are like generally backed by faith or personal experiences. Rarely someone takes a scientific path and the discussions go towards, the discussion flows in this direction wherein we are talking eMeesh devices, labs, scientists, doctors, clinical trials. So, this is something which is very different. Generally, this does not happen. And I would also say that it's a challenge because, the traditional path says just back it up with the faith and experience. But someone walking towards a scientific path means inviting challenges and solving them. Right. So there must be many challenges in this direction also.
There have been a lot of challenges. It has not been an easy path, but it has been a very rewarding path.
Right.
So
when you say 1,000 people getting blessing together, so all those people, everyone has different problem, different situations, different challenges, different places. The same thing works equally for them, for all of them, even when we don't know their specific problems or we are unable to distinct, and that to at this scale.
Yeah. So these clinical trials, like I said, we were
Uh,
double blinded. We had no idea what their problems were. We have
uh,
no idea, like, their names, what they look like. We have no idea.
mhm,
Does this person have issues with their menstrual cycles? Does this person have issues with depression? We have no idea. We just know maybe some kind of mental or emotional health
mhm,
crisis, but
mhm,
we don't know what is going on in their
mhm,
lives, what their relationships are like. We know nothing about these
mhm,
people. And the energy
mhm,
is able to target each one differently, right? We're doing psychological assessments the whole
mhm,
journey,
mhm,
and they're assessing where they were at baseline, day 0, day 90, and day 180.
mhm,
So not even over like just a couple weeks. We're doing long-term measurement.
mhm,
A lot of the people who have done these clinical trials, who have been in the
mhm,
avenue of spirituality or transformation or something like that, they usually use very small groups of people. They
mhm,
don't repeat the experiments. They don't have repeatable data,
mhm,
and they have very, very short time periods. And
mhm,
I say all the time, I said this before, that you can associate benefits of smoking with blood pressure within
mhm,
that sort of time period,
mhm,
right? Because you
mhm,
take deeper breaths when you smoke in the same way that can lower your blood pressure,
mhm,
right? But long term, you see an adverse effect. So it needs to be measured and conducted over a long period of time. There needs to be proper blinding protocols, and you can't measure trivial parameters that have
mhm,
huge psychological
right.
effect like blood pressure.
Yeah.
You need to, like one of our clinical trials, I'll give you an example. We measured over 100 parameters in blood, and we've measured things like neurotransmitters, hormones, insulin levels. We've measured nutrient absorption, right?
Mhm,
Your body's ability to absorb vitamins and
mhm,
minerals. We've measured over 100 parameters. I can't be cholesterol levels, all those
mhm,
different things. And there are many of these things that are impossible to affect
mhm,
psychologically.
mhm.
So we
Indeed.
get 0 results in the psychological group.
Mhm,
And then even in the conventional methods that are available, right? Some of these things have only marginal improvements by the best methods and treatments we have
mhm,
available to
mhm.
us. One of them
Yeah.
is the clotho-protein. That one we've only seen marginal ability to improve, right?
Mhm.
Maybe a few decimals of a percentage
Uh,
or something like that. Like, don't quote me on
yeah.
that, but very marginal. I know that
Uh,
for sure. And the clotho-protein is the protein that we use to measure anti-aging. The more
uh,
clotho you have, you can say
mhm,
the more longevity you have, right? The
mhm,
longer life you have, the
mhm,
the greater quality of your life, right? It's an indication of anti-aging when you have more clotho.
mhm,
And they've only been able to increase clotho by very marginal amounts. And
mhm,
we've seen in our clinical trials 685% improvement
mhm.
in the clotho protein.
Oh, mm,
Unheard of, not possible,
mm,
never been done before. We've seen improvements in oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin by
mhm,
hundreds of percentages, things that you don't see outside of directly administering it
mhm,
intravenously into your system at high doses. And we've seen those significant improvements in blood parameters.
mhm,
We've seen people's insulin sensitivity improve. We've seen cholesterol go down. We've seen inflammation. There are certain therapies out there for people with severe immune disorders or immune
mhm,
diseases and people with cancer, right? Things like that, who need severe biologic therapies to help reduce their levels of inflammation and
mhm,
alter their immune pathways.
mhm,
And those come with a huge host of risks. That's why those are the only groups of people we use those therapies on, right?
mhm,
Because they have a lot of problems and a lot of risk factors for the human body. And
mhm,
so, whatever effectiveness in its ability to reduce inflammation for these patients,
mhm,
right? What we've seen in our ability to reduce inflammation is oftentimes even similar or greater than those
mhm,
biologic therapies
mhm,
without the risks, without any of
mhm,
the adverse effects.
mhm,
So we have so many parameters that exceed
mhm,
psychological and placebo influence that says beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is something
mhm,
empirical, objective, and real, and
mhm,
has absolutely nothing in the realm of placebo or psychology. And
mhm,
at the same time, when you get to the other science, right, 4,000 experiments in non living materials,
mhm,
agriculture, microbes, right, cells,
mhm,
these things don't have psychology. These things
mhm,
don't have belief systems. These things don't know they're getting a blessing that I know of.
mhm,
Right? So these things cannot be influenced psychologically.
mhm,
And we see data that science says it is impossible happening
mhm,
here as well. We're able to do things that science simply says you cannot do this.
mhm,
Right? We're changing the laws of physics. We're creating new materials and new species. We're doing things that science has long given up on being able to do, or claims that cannot be done because it's just simply how life is. It's how the laws of physics work. And we're able to change those laws. We're able to make changes to all of these things and create all of this without the horrible repercussions from a lot of these therapies and drugs and treatments that we have available to us. So if we truly want to grow and solve our pressing problems, even create a preventative model of healthcare in order to prevent people from getting sick or ill in the first place, like all of the science should follow the evidence. Right? Science should ignore its bias. It should ignore its skepticism to a certain degree. Certain skepticism is healthy, but it should ignore its belief-based skepticism, follow the evidence to where it leads. And right now it's leading to consciousness. That consciousness is the missing factor. It's the answer that is solving all of these problems. It's the missing piece that connects everything together. It's the context we need to make sense of our lives and our world and to progress. That's its answer. And we can no longer ignore it. We have 6,000 studies that say this is something big to look at, right? This is available right, in over 3,000 universities worldwide in over 100 countries. Even the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, has adopted. They've indexed our studies, our experiments, our publications. This is available with Cambridge, Oxford, MIT, Harvard, right? Major universities and institutions have started indexing and accepting our papers, our publications. So eventually, I see this as being a huge revolution in science, medicine, technology, human health in the not so distant future. I truly believe within my lifetime, everything will change. And because at the rate and advancement that we are moving at, it's science has no choice but to. And like I said, people will return to spirituality and religion the moment it's able to do more for us than what science has been able to accomplish.
Right. So are we trying to say that we are heading in a direction wherein consciousness will replace doctors?
I wouldn't say that. I don't think the intention is to replace doctors. There's a lot of things that doctors are good at. There's a lot of things that science has done that are fantastic. And they benefit us greatly. So I don't think the answer is to eradicate doctors, to eradicate medical treatment, or all those things. I think there is a way that may be preventative, the need to even have medical treatment in the first place. Maybe that can be avoided by simply evolving your consciousness, increasing your quality of life and your well-being, right? Just in doing that, you might not need to go see a doctor, right? There's no need anymore. But I also feel like this can work very much as a complement in addition to. So we always tell everybody, right? Whatever the doctor recommends, like, don't go against your doctor's recommendations. We encourage people to follow what their doctors tell them to do. But we say, receive these blessings and, maybe this will help you on your journey with your doctor. This could increase the benefits that you're getting.
For the person who's receiving blessing, is it necessary the person has to be spiritual or religious or has certain conduct, lifestyle, nature, anything?
No. No, so we don't endorse any belief system, any religion. We also are not against anything. So it's simply evolving things at the level of consciousness. So we have atheists who have come to us, receive blessings. In fact, my personal assistant, she used to be an atheist until she had a blessing, and it really confirmed her belief in a divine authority out there. So it's really not required for you to have any belief, for you to even, practice, perform anything, for you to do anything, because all of these happen at behavior-based levels. So consciousness being fundamental, right? That maybe it will help you get more outcome from what you do in your life, from maybe your activities or your prayers or whatever it is. But those types of behavior-based models have no effect on consciousness. That's like saying, these things can change God in a way. No, it's consciousness that comes first and has an influence over these things. But we're supportive of all religions because we are the missing link that's validating religious and spiritual authenticity. So I think that we're in great support of whoever's religion from wherever your background is from.
And when the person receives blessing, is there, is there any particular feeling which is important, or outcomes are important? I mean, outcomes is what they experience, or there's a process or feeling or experiences they take?
Feeling's always nice, but
Uh-huh.
a lot of people don't feel anything.
But
But the outcome is the empirical, it's the data, it's the reality of it.
uh-huh.
So you can have great feelings with psychology. You can have great feelings by simply saying, like with the placebo, the sham healer, the person who faked a blessing in our clinical trials, they could feel like something's happening, right? But the actual outcome will be lacking. There will be nothing there. So we don't really think that the feeling is necessary. And that's exactly what people feel is a lot of them have no feelings. Some of them have great experiences. They see light, they see divine, they have all these different experiences. We can't validate whether that's true or not. That's not something that science can testify to, but what science can measure and testify to is the effect on your quality of life, your health and well-being, your neurotransmitters, your hormones. So these people after blessing, the most common within the first couple of weeks is their quality of sleep improves dramatically. Their mental state and calmness increases dramatically, right? Their thoughts slow down. They enter into states of calmness and peace, right? They find their spiritual practices actually improve, right? They're able to connect on deeper levels. They're able to sustain. I had somebody who, said he couldn't meditate more than 15 minutes, and now he's meditating an hour because of these blessings. So these blessings really improve many different areas of your life. They calm down your thoughts. People experience their hair and nails growing faster. They experience their skin glowing, like their quality of skin, the smoothness, the clarity of it, everything improves, right? Sleep is a big one for many people. Sleep is an indication of calmness and peace, right? And having good quality sleep leads to lower levels of inflammation and less cognitive decline over a lifetime. A huge source of cognitive decline is poor quality sleep. So a lot of these people experience those immediately from the blessing, or usually within the first couple weeks. But of course, everybody has their own problems and needs, and everyone is targeted differently by this consciousness, this energy.
Any memorable transformation or any such experience anyone faced, which is memorable for you?
So many again, but well, okay, there was this woman who had, I'm saying this because it's very objective, right? It's nothing to do with psychology. She had a tear in her cornea, right? Which, if I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, but she's, had multiple children. And she says that the pain of that is worse than childbirth. And that kind of corneal tear that she had was progressive, right? So she went to the emergency room and then finally to an eye doctor. And all of the assessments said, this is not something that improves. This is not something that goes away. This is permanent damage to your eye. And she had to live her whole life for years using lubricating eye drops constantly all the time, because what happens is every night as she would go to bed, she would close her eyes, and that tear in her cornea would catch on her eyelid every morning, and when she'd open her eyes, she'd cause a new tear in her cornea all over again. It would rip open every morning, and that pain is so excruciating, worse than childbirth. That's not a way to live. You can imagine the stress just going to sleep every night wondering if the pain will be there in the morning, if it will tear again. And she had to carry around like eye drops with her in all her pockets and her purse, everything. She lived her life on that. And after the blessing, right, she wasn't experiencing a lot of the tearing, but what happened is she ended up going on a trip somewhere with her sisters, and she's not used to not having her eye drops with her. She always has them everywhere. For some reason on this trip, she didn't have them anywhere. She looked in her purse, she looked in her pocket, she didn't have a single eye drop on her. And so with huge anxiety, she went to bed that night, scared, terrified, petrified of what the morning would bring. She woke up in the morning, she braced herself, she opened her eyes, no pain. Nothing. And every morning since then, no pain, nothing, not a single eye drop. And so she threw out all of her eye drops after that. When she went back to the eye doctor, right, they took a look at her eyes, the corneal tear was gone. It had healed completely. It disappeared. And they were shocked because they were highly concerned with the state of her eye. They're like, this doesn't get better. This only
Right.
gets worse,
Mhm.
and it affects your vision over time. It causes so many implications and
Mhm.
problems. And just like that, it was gone. And over time, she actually found her vision returned to 20/20 vision as well.
Mhm.
So she had better vision after the corneal tear than before it.
Mhm.
So that's one miraculous example.
If God exists, then why is so much suffering in the world?
Well, suffering comes from lower states of consciousness, which is less
Uh-huh.
of the grace of God.
Uh,
Right. So more of God in your life, right? As we've seen with all these clinical trials and all these results, is when there's
mhm.
more of the grace of God, right? It's a clear indication that God wants you to be happy. God wants
Mhm.
what's best for your life, because those are the outcome we see. When this
Mhm.
energy is evident, God doesn't damage or hurt or do anything
Mhm.
adverse for you.
Mhm.
God always supports. God always leads you in the direction for your greatest growth and happiness. We
Mhm.
don't know what your problems are, and God is always aware of what they are. God knows what your problems are. God knows your issues. God knows how to solve them.
Mhm.
So a lot of these things, I think, are because we have removed God from our lives,
Mhm.
right? What transformation is when you're not constantly evolving and transforming, right? Energy either moves forward or backward. There's nothing
Mhm.
static in life, right?
Mhm.
And so when we look at energy in that way, then we have to understand, what is transformation. You take a seed, for example.
Mhm.
A seed transforming, is it, getting planted in soil, sprouting, turning into a plant or a tree? It goes through periods of transition and growth. That's called transformation. If you just take a seed and don't do anything with it,
Mhm.
inherently what will happen, if you just take a seed, put it in a box, over years of its life, it
Mhm.
will degenerate, it will lose its potency, and eventually that same seed, if you try and plant it later in life, it will no longer grow and flourish
Right.
and transform and evolve. It
Mhm.
loses that potency. So
Mhm.
the way our lives are led, the way that we have removed God from our lives, from a lot of the way we conduct ourselves,
Mhm.
from how we're nurtured, how we're taught, growth and transformation happens. A lot of these things are preventing us from harnessing the ability and utilization of true transformation.
Mhm.
So over time, we have no choice but to degenerate. That's the natural flow of energy and how energy
Mhm.
works. So I mean, we can say why God did this. I have no idea. It's hard to say why God does anything
Mhm.
unless you are God. So even the enlightened can't tell you why God does certain things.
Mhm.
So, but all I can say is transformation is what is required for us to continue to grow and evolve and experience well-being, mental
Mhm.
health, peace, all those good things in life. When transformation isn't there, we see exactly what happens with our lives now: mental health crises, mental restlessness, poor
Mhm.
quality of sleep, poor health. All of these things are indicative of
Mhm.
consciousness that has not been able to transform and
Mhm.
move in a direction for its greatest growth.
Mhm. Okay. Speaking of enlightenment, like
Yes.
uh, as you mentioned that when you met Guruji, you walked towards the path of enlightenment, right?
Yes.
And is it something which can be learned? A person can walk towards that path. How does this process work?
Well, for my journey, it was the blessings as
Mhm.
well as his nurturing,
Mhm.
right? He nurtured me about a lot of it is unlearning, a lot of the dogma and a lot of the,
Uh-huh.
misinformation that's out there in the world.
Uh-huh.
And then a lot of it is, as I was telling you, is how is life, how do you conduct your life to retain or bring about that purity and innocence again?
Mhm.
So there is this sense of following the higher dharma, the Sanatan dharma, right? And
Mhm.
there's this concept of the divine principles and fundamentals, what
Mhm.
creates that transformation within your being, what kind
Mhm.
of characters, right, that actually bring forward transformation.
Mhm.
So there is that aspect of it. But a huge part of it was, I think I was already in a very pure and innocent stage. And that's what
Mhm.
even he has told me on my journey, which is why my path was so quick to
Mhm.
enlightenment after meeting him,
Okay.
because I was already in that state of purity and innocence, in that huge surrender to
Mhm.
divine, that I was just kind of like at that point where all I needed was a little push.
Mhm.
And so, but at the same time, his blessings and his nurturing was absolutely essential. But
Mhm.
I must say, there is no practice, trick, or technique that can teach you to become enlightened.
Mhm.
Only God can create enlightenment. Only
Mhm.
God can make that possible. So in the same way, you can't change
Mhm.
God with any trick or technique. It's a matter of God's decision.
Mhm. Got it. And in between, like we mentioned, that because consciousness is lower, religion is not a part of people, or God is not part of people.
Mhm.
So why is the younger generation, the next generation, moving away from God, spirituality, or religion? Why? I mean, this concept is kind of not as much prevalent as it used to be.
Well, I mean, they have good reason to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything wrong with what they're doing, because anybody in that situation would. What do you see that science has done? There was a distinct point in time where science and religion parted with each other. And religion, its inability to take its rituals and dogmas and the things that it claims to, transform your destiny, your fate and fortune, and its inability to articulate that in a scientific setting, to prove it scientifically, has limited to strictly faith-based institution. And that faith-based institution, when we get in terms of outcome, as opposed to science, which has separated itself because of this faith-based limitation here, it says, we don't operate on that same principle. We operate on the principle of observing reality, of measuring phenomena. So there was a natural divide between the two. Now, what happens with science as a result of that divide is you see science's growth. You see what it's able to do for humankind. You see what it's able to do and the advancements of our technology, our medicine, our health, right? And in terms of everything, its ability to articulate and give form and narration to our life, make sense of things that other things never made sense before. It's able to give things proper context and understanding. It's able to give comfort and provide for us in ways that religion seemed to lack in its ability to do. And so simply because we seem to reap, very quick, immediate benefits from the progression of science, separate from religion, a lot of people were like, this seems more reliable for me. This seems like the truth. This seems like the real path. Right. And so that is why that separation happened, is because it simply provided more outcomes for people. It gave more for people so that they can live better quality lives. They could have more comforts. They could, deal with health issues that religion, praying to God might not get rid of your cancer, but maybe chemotherapy and radiation will. Right. There are certain things that we see religion has been unable to do. And so that's why we're bringing consciousness in now, because now we see science and its capabilities also has limitations in a lot of different areas of life. And even in its advancements so far, those advancements have also stopped or slowed down. And you see the same effect where people are also starting to leave science a little, because they recognize science's inability to solve some of the most basic problems. And so as a result, people are kind of going back into like this weird limbo place called the wellness industry, where it's neither science nor spirituality. It's somewhere in between, where it's kind of like new age concepts and a lot of harmful practices because it's all pseudoscience based and, a lot of things that can actually, cause huge problems and harm you and do a lot of adverse things or waste your money and your time. And so that's why, and this wellness industry, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So it's prospering. It's more profitable than the pharmaceutical industry, right? We always blame pharmaceuticals for trying to, take money from people. But look at the wellness industry. It's much more profitable than pharmaceuticals. So that shows you how many people are leaving science in droves and also leaving religion in droves. They're trying to find answers in places there are none. And then like with our mental health crisis, you see the stigma of mental health is decreasing, but the number of people who are talking about it, who are attending therapy, who are trying multiple different modalities, we see the numbers of people with mental health problems are increasing at rapid rates, unlike anything you've ever seen. So if there was a viable solution out there, if there was something that could truly solve this at its root cause, something, a cure, if it's a cure, if it's a solution, it should be universal, right? there's no universal solution that can target
Right.
everybody's mental and emotional health problems.
Hmm.
We have not found that.
Right.
And so this is the missing link. It's consciousness that's missing that makes sense, and that will help science and spirituality and religion finally progress again and work together. It gives everything the proper context. It finally makes sense of everything. It makes sense of God. It makes sense of outcome. It makes sense of all the missing pieces that has led to all of our problems we see today.
Right. So it has been science versus religion. That's what has taken the next generation away. But if it's science and religion, then they would again come back to it, come back to spirituality, come back to religion. If there are scientific evidences to the concept of spirituality and religion, right?
Right. I think we're at a point where we're competing with outcome. Right? That's the real effect. We're competing with the outcome of science. And so now we've seen the limitations of science. So if we can outcompete what science is able to do in the realm of spirituality and religion, then we'll restore people's faith and trust, because people just follow the outcome. They follow what will actually give them comfort and benefits in their lives, whether psychology has any effect or not. They want the outcome. They want to feel better. They want to live a better life. And so the younger generation, all generations, will restore their faith and reliance upon religion and spirituality the moment it can provide more for us than what science can do. That's the true answer, which is where God should be.
Yes. Great. Dahryn, it was a very insightful conversation, and my deepest respect, regard, and congratulations for the great work you're doing for the humanity.